All right, so we're going to talk more about the Constitution. I know I haven't been with you for a while. Let me do it a little different color there. And I'm going to talk about the Constitutional Convention. We talked a little bit about that. It was from May 14th to September 1787. Well, yeah, September, I don't remember the exact date or day, but from May to September of 1787. And last time we talked a little bit about mixed government theory, and today we're going to talk about the separation of powers. And the separation of powers, the founding fathers felt that it was necessary to ancient republics that had fallen to the one type of government. You remember before we talked about the mixed government theory? And so this kind of led to this idea of the separation of powers to some extent. And of course, they also were influenced by the writings of Montesquieu. All right. And of course, what Montesquieu said, he provided the answer, and with the separation of powers theory, which held that the executive, legislative, and judicial functions of government should be separated into three distinct branches. So you have the executive branch, and y'all know this already, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. The executive branch, of course, is the president and his cabinet, the House and the Senate, and of course the judicial branch at the federal level, of course, is the Supreme Court, but then you have other courts, lower courts below it, and of course they're all separate. That's for example, and again, I'm sure you know this already. The legislative branch could pass a law, the executive branch could sign it, but then people can oppose the law and take it to court to see if it is even constitutional. For example, Obama's health care law that was argued in the Supreme Court. Now, some people get, what you have to understand, people get all huffy about and upset and emotional about certain laws that are passed and this and that, and it goes to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court argues the law to see whether it's constitutional or unconstitutional. But this is, a great thing. I mean, the alternative in I guess, a less civilized society would be that people just fight each other. So as crazy as politics sometimes gets, and as much as we may have a distaste for politics, we also have to understand that it's not necessarily a bad thing, because sometimes people can sort of, go through a process, all right, and even though people may disagree, they go through this process and through certain institutions, all right, so that they don't fight each other, okay? So all of this kind of stuff, is not necessarily a bad thing. Now, what you also have to realize is that the Constitution of the United States that we are still using today, and it makes you realize how ingenious the Constitution was, but it was also a bundle of compromises, okay? And one compromise, of course, was what is known as the Great Compromise. there was a division between large states and small states. And the division was representation. The small states, when I say small here, we're really talking about population, but at that time it was geographic um, as well. Today it's not. We have Alaska, which is a large state, but a very small population. But back then it was pretty, proportional to the geographic and the population. Anyway, the small states did not want to be slaves, you might say, to the large states. So if you had large states, meaning that they would if the number of representatives, if the number of representatives was a lot more than the small states, then the large states would be able to do anything they wanted to do, and the small states really wouldn't have any representation. This is a perfect example of what I talked about in the lecture on mixed government theory when I said that you have to watch out in a democracy for majority tyranny. And so the small states were afraid, that's the end, the small states were afraid of majority tyranny. Okay, does that, hopefully that makes sense to you. Okay, let me maybe explain it again, all right? So let's say the number of representatives that go into the legislature, all right, will be proportional to the population. And so at that time, say Virginia was a large state or New York was a large state with a large population, they would have more representatives than, say, poor little Titani, Rhode Island. Well, people people in Rhode Island was thinking, well, we're going to have one representative, and we'll never have true representation in the federal government. And so this caused a huge dispute, and rightfully so. It made total sense. So they solved it. All right, by the Great Compromise. And what was this? Well, you would have, and this also was influenced largely by mixed government theory, you would have two legislative branches. One would be the House of Representatives, and the other was the Senate. Now, how many senators does each state have? 2. So Alaska has 2 senators, New York has 2 senators, Florida has 2 senators, Louisiana has 2 senators. Now, how many representatives does each state have? Excuse me. Well, it depends on the population. All right, so Alaska may have 1 representative, but New York has a whole lot more. Okay, so this is the Great Compromise between the small states and the large states. Okay? Now, another compromise, and this one was certainly a little kind of insidious, I guess. I mean, this is crazy when you think about it. Let me get my and this was the 3/5 compromise. Well, because the House of Representatives, the number of representatives in the House was going to be dependent on the population, people started thinking, well, the slave states started thinking, the slave state started thinking that the slaves should be counted in the population, because if the slaves were counted in the population, then they would have more representatives. So, it was really about power. Oh, Lord, I can't spell this morning. I'm sorry. Really about power in the government. And this was like maybe some of your grandmothers say, this was a big tracas, okay? And almost caused the convention to just collapse. But they came up with like I said, 3/5 compromise. And basically what this stated was that for every 5 slaves, they would be counted as 3 in the population. And so, of course, this is the, I guess, great paradox in American history, is that in the Declaration of Independence and even in the in the Constitution, we'll talk about the Bill of Rights a little bit later, that you have, there's so much talk of freedom, liberty. Remember, in the Declaration of Independence, the function of government is to protect life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And when the government no longer does that, then it's the right of the people to change that government. Now, what we do in our system, instead of having a violent revolution, okay, then we vote. We use the democratic process to constantly change the government instead of a revolution. Okay, some people talk about we need to have a revolution. Well, you can have a revolution if you want through your vote. Okay, even though it may seem like your vote doesn't count, it does. Okay, so that was the 3/5 compromise. If you have any questions, these are very important for your next test. I'll probably give you the next test about 2 weeks from now, maybe a week and a half. We'll talk about that later. But these are very important. Okay, the Great Compromise and the 3/5 compromise. There was also a debate, which is known as the slave trade debate. And there were some people at the Constitutional Convention that wanted to outlaw the transatlantic slave trade, which was just really, in terms of humanity, really awful. Okay, I think we had talked about the Middle Passage and all of that. And so basically what they said was that they would allow the foreign slave trade until 20 years after the Constitution went into effect, until 1808, and then the foreign slave trade was outlawed. Okay? All right, so that's good for this lecture, and I will be posting some more. Again, I'm sorry I haven't posted lectures lately, but maybe it was good to give you all a little break, but we have to get busy. I got really busy with school, and I had to get some projects done, and I neglected y'all a little bit. I apologize. All right, so make sure we're going to get started here, and like I said, in about a week and a half, 2 weeks, you'll have your next test, and I'll talk to you about that later. It won't be too bad.